here we have the new Fujifilm X100VI. And today, I'm going to tell you all about it. Hi everyone and welcome to Pal to Tech. Well, it just happened. Fujifilm just announced the brand new X100VI camera. I had the opportunity to review its features, test out its ergonomics, image quality, and shooting capabilities. The model that I used was a pre-production unit. And what this means is that it wasn't the final production release of the camera, so keep that in mind. The X100VI is, if you haven't guessed it, the 6th version of the camera, and it comes in both black and silver options. The most significant change over the old version is the brand new 40.2 megapixel X-Trans CMOS 5 HR sensor and 5th generation X processor. Both of these had previously been introduced with the X-T5 and the X-H2. You can now shoot up to a 7,728 by 5,152 pixel image, which is exactly the same resolution as the X-T5. The camera's autofocus algorithm has been updated with AI technology. This is just a fancy way of saying that the camera now includes subject detection, like the recent XT and XH cameras, and the camera can now detect animals, birds, cars, motorcycles, bicycles, airplanes, trains, insects, and drones. Oh, and the subject detection also has tracking autofocus for video shooting as well. Speaking of video, the camera is now powerful enough to shoot up to 6.2K 30p resolution video that does come with a slight crop. The processor also allows for the brand new REALA Ace film simulation to be included with the camera. This means that there are now a total of 20 film simulations in that camera. So taking the camera out of the box, the first thing that struck me, even before the camera itself, was the build quality of the lens cap of all things. It's not a little piece of plastic at all, okay? It connects very nicely with a firm but solid grip to the camera's lens. And you absolutely would not need to worry about it accidentally falling off in a camera bag or wherever. Also included in the box is a single NP-W126S battery and a USB Type-C to A cable. Now, there is no charger included with the cable, so you're gonna need to plug it into your own USB-A charger like I did here. And you also get the usual Fujifilm camera strap and a little plastic cover that goes over the hot shoe mount. But have a look at this camera. The anodized pressed aluminum camera body has a very solid, high-quality, compact feel to it. It is heavier than the original X100V. In fact, it is 43 grams heavier, which brings the total weight of the new camera, which includes the battery and the memory card, to 521 grams. The height of the camera is still the same, 74.8 millimeters, and the width is 128 millimeters, exactly like the X100V. Now, what's slightly different is the depth of the camera. The new camera is 2 millimeters deeper, which brings the total to 55.3 millimeters. This was obviously done to accommodate the brand new IBIS unit. And the 23 millimeter focal length is equivalent to 35 millimeters in 35 millimeter format. It has a minimum focus distance of 10 centimeters. And I found that figure to be absolutely accurate and spot on in my testing. Like its predecessor, the lens contains its own built-in ND filter, which you can now use for video shooting. The aperture range on the lens is f/16 to f2, and the A position on the ring has no lock button for it. The ring itself makes a fairly loud clicking sound. And there are 2 protruding rings on the side of the aperture ring. And I love that because the focusing ring is so close to the aperture ring, but with them included, it makes it very easy for your thumb and forefinger to quickly locate and turn it. And speaking of the focus ring, it's not just a focus ring. It also acts as a control ring, which you can customize what it'll do when you actually turn it. By default, the ring controls the digital teleconverter. And speaking of teleconverters, the lens will also work with the optional teleconverter and wide conversion lens accessories as well. Also on the front of the camera, there's the Viewfinder, a built-in flash unit, and a switch that contains both a button as well as a selector switch that controls the electrical to optical viewfinder switching. Both of them can be customized, but the selector switch can only be customized when it's rotated There's also a front command dial, which can be pressed inward just like a button. The back of the camera contains your diopter dial next to the viewfinder. Now, I found that I had to actually turn that diopter dial all the way in one direction as far as it would go. Either my eyes are getting crappier and worse, or that diopter dial is not as powerful as the one on the X-T5 camera. It's probably my eyes. Next to the electronic viewfinder, there's also the sensor that tells the camera when you're looking through the viewfinder. You've got 2 buttons and a command dial going across the top area right here. The command dial can be pressed in just like a button, and both the button and the command dial can also be customized with a function setting. You also have a joystick, a menu OK button, a playback button, and a DISP back button that also serves as your Bluetooth control. And of course, we have the 3-inch tilting 1.62 million dot LCD touchscreen with a 3:2 aspect ratio. It pulls out from the left side notch, and the screen itself tilts further off the back of the body down to 45 degrees, 15 degrees more than the screen on the X100V. I love the tilt screen on the X100VI. You can quickly get to both high and low angles, and it's a screen that deserves to have photography first stamped right on it. Looking now at the top of the camera, you've got a hot shoe mount, a combined shutter speed and ISO dial, an on-off switch, an exposure compensation dial, and another customizable function button. The range of the mechanical shutter is 15 minutes to 1/4000th of a second. The shutter on the camera is a leaf shutter. This means that you do not have to worry about a flash sync speed. If you switch the camera over to electronic shutter, you can shoot with a shutter range from 15 minutes to 1/180,000th of a second. Also, in your menu, there's a shutter count option. Something you should be aware of regarding this shutter count feature is that there are other actions that you can take on the camera that will increase the shutter count. These would be things like turning the camera off, or changing the viewfinder display, or going into playback mode. Those would also activate the shutter mechanism and increase the shutter count. And there's this gap between the 1/4000th shutter speed setting and the automatic setting, which I actually really liked. To set your ISO, you just pull the entire dial up and then rotate. The native ISO range on this camera is now ISO 125 that goes all the way up to 12,800. Once you choose your native ISO value, push the dial back down. And you see right here, you've got 2 white indicators showing where each of these settings are currently set, ISO and shutter speed. Also, you can choose an extended ISO value that goes all the way down to ISO 64 and all the way up to ISO 51,200. There is also one other ISO improvement over the previous generation X100V, and that is the minimum shutter speed in auto ISO. In the previous camera model, if you were editing one of your automatic ISO options, the fastest shutter speed that the camera would allow was 1/500th of a second. That's it. You could not choose a value faster than that for auto ISO, which doesn't do much good if you're trying to shoot, I don't know, a bolt of lightning. Because at 1/500th of a second, it's just impossible. Well, we have very good news. That minimum shutter speed restriction has now been increased to 1/2000th of a second. The exposure compensation dial is very similar to the one that's found on XT cameras, but it's a bit smaller. The custom button is very well positioned next to the combined shutter release and on-off switch. I found that there was sufficient room for my finger to manipulate between the 2 controls. And I really like the room and the layout and the positioning of the controls on this camera. I was actually surprised because I thought this was going to be this tiny little compact thing, but there's actually plenty of room to maneuver around the various controls. On the left side of the camera, you have your focus mode switch with single, continuous, and manual focus. They made it a raised switch, which was really good because you can easily figure it out by just feeling it and not having to look at it. And the right side of the camera has a non-removable plastic door that provides access to a 2.5mm port, which is a combination mic and remote release port. Keep in mind that this microphone port is the smaller 2.5mm size and not the more common 3.5mm size that you will see on many other Fujifilm cameras. Below it is a USB-C connector that's used for charging the camera's battery, battery, plugging it into a computer, and using it as a webcam and so forth. And below that is a micro HDMI port. The bottom of the camera has a slightly more rounded shape to it compared with the older X100V. It has a 1/4 inch tripod mount, which has been moved slightly more forward compared with the earlier model of the camera. There's a plastic door that opens up to where you store the battery and the SD card. It takes the exact same NPW126S battery as the X100V, XT2, and XT3 cameras. I don't think they could have tried using the larger NPW235 battery because that would have probably made the X106's body considerably thicker. Remember that with this model, they had to fit an entire IBIS unit inside of it as well. You can now get up to 450 shots using the optical viewfinder mode. And this is an increase from the original 420 shots that you got from the older X100V. Above the battery is the SD card slot. The camera has a single SD card slot with support for UHS-1 SD card transfer rates. You see there's this little removable rubber section where it can be sort of slid to the side to allow a cord to pass through. And that's used for the installation of a dummy battery. There's two observations I want to point out right now at this point in the video regarding the ergonomics we've discussed so far. The first is having the SD card slot inside the battery slot instead of on the side of the camera. Changing out your SD card is going to be more time consuming if you've got, say, the camera mounted on a tripod or mounted on a gimbal or whatever. And that's because the bottom tripod hole and the position of the battery door, you need to take the camera off the tripod or the slider or the gimbal to remove any kind of mounting plate that might be attached to the bottom before you can fully open the battery door. And secondly, regarding ergonomics, having the HDMI, mic, and USB ports all on the same side where you are holding on to the grip of the camera may be difficult. If you've got the camera plugged into USB power, connected to an external monitor, or perhaps both, and you're wanting to hand hold it, right? Because all of that is on the same side of the camera. Now, maybe this would affect exactly no one on planet Earth except for me, but I wanted to bring it up to you nevertheless. Now, a significant part of the X106 is its hybrid viewfinder. Many of its features are the same as on the previous X100V camera. In addition to the LCD screen that's on the back of the camera, you have a viewfinder that can give you 3 distinct modes. First, you can use it as a regular electronic viewfinder, just like the ones that you'll see on many Fujifilm cameras. Second, you can switch it over to use as an optical viewfinder. When you do that, you'll see an electronic settings overlay on the rangefinder view. And third, you can enable quite a unique feature called the electronic rangefinder, which combines these two and it inserts a picture-in-picture. This could be a focus check or an entire frame or even a photo review playback once you've taken the shot. This was one item I wanted to test out way more thoroughly, but I literally ran out of time before I had to return the camera to Fujifilm. Another very new significant feature that's been added is a 5-axis in-body image stabilization system, otherwise known as IBIS. I am going to show you how it performs for both stills and videos, so stick around and keep watching. The X106 now has a fully built-in Frame.io camera-to-cloud technology. What this means is that you can connect the camera wirelessly to Wi-Fi and then use your Frame.io account to upload photos and videos right as soon as you shoot them. You could do it right from inside, built into the camera. There is also full support to use the camera as a webcam at up to 4K 60p. I'll tell you how that turned out later on. There's other features, things like bracketing, all the different options for, toy camera and filters and things like that. I am not going to go through every single setting in that drive menu because this video is actually supposed to be just a first look at the camera. So let's now talk about image quality, dynamic range, film simulations, and ISO. Please remember that I am working off a pre-production version of the camera, which of course means that they are pre-production versions of the RAW files. For those of you who have never used a Fujifilm sensor beyond, say, 26 megapixels, it's such an awesome benefit to be able to crop in to subjects that are further away and not lose as much image resolution. In fact, I think it can actually contribute to changing a bit how you actually shoot. I've been taking more of a, yeah, I'll just step back a little bit here and take the shot, not worry about, yeah, whatever. And then when I get in post-production, it's like, okay, I'll crop where I want. I'm not saying that it makes me, lazier, but it just gives me more options. Of course, with more pixels comes larger file sizes. The highest quality JPEG image that you can get on the X100VI will result in a 20 megabyte file size. And the camera also gives you the option to choose the high efficiency image file instead of JPEG. If you do that, your file size will be reduced to about 14 megabytes and you get a 10-bit file. However, the HEIF format is not supported in many applications, and I would not recommend using it regularly for now. If you set your raw file output to uncompressed, you will get the largest file the camera produces, which is around 85 megabytes. Now, if you set it to lossless compressed, you will get the same exact quality, but your file size is now reduced down to about half at 43 megabytes. And finally, if you set it to compressed, which I don't recommend doing for most Fujifilm users, you will get a file size of 28 megabytes. So in shooting with this camera, I couldn't help but notice just how much I love the 23mm focal length. And with a 40 megapixel sensor, you can crop in, obviously, and you have just that little bit of extra room that 23 gives you. And the new REALA Ace film simulation. It's a little less saturated than Provia, a little more saturated than classic chrome, and it has an edgier tonality than Pro negative high. And what I tended to really love about it is how it handles skin tones under normal lighting conditions. I actually think that it renders skin tones among the best of the Fujifilm film simulations. However, it's not always for every situation. For example, I really wasn't that thrilled with it in this shot. Well, here's REALA Ace, and here is Provia. And here's Pro negative high. And generally what I found is REALA Ace does a better job with skin tones, whereas, say, Provia does a better job with fur tones. My point being is that there are now 20 film simulations in the camera, so there's something for everyone. Let's take a look now at the 23mm fixed length lens and see how it performs in the center and in the edges with different apertures. Here we are at f2, and right off the bat, you can see there's vignetting. You see it right here, right here. When I jump to f2.8, boom, the vignetting goes away. Keep in mind that I am looking at raw files. Now, if I look at the straight out of camera JPEG in Capture One, have a look at this. Here's the raw in Capture One. Here's the JPEG in Capture One with no adjustments made. Raw, JPEG, raw, JPEG. So right off the bat, it's corrected in Capture One. If we jump into the center at f2, here we're at 100%. Let's go to 200. There's a little bit of softness for sure, and some minor chromatic aberration going on. However, this can easily be adjusted in programs like Capture One or Lightroom. And you can just go right from this to this. Same image, just with a few seconds of adjustment. Let's look at the corner. And although there's the vignetting going on, the corner is quite sharp. As soon as we jump to f2.8, bam, the vignetting's gone. Going into the center, 200%. Definitely starting to look better there. Going to the corner, nice and sharp. Now we're at f4, and it looks great in the center at f4. And so do the corners. Here's f5.6 at 200%. I mean, it looks great. Center to corners all over. Now we're down to f8, and it's starting to get a bit soft. However, the corners are still looking good. Jumping to f11, zooming into the center, and no doubt about it, it is noticeably soft. However, the corners, although just starting to get a little bit soft, still very good. Now, when we jump to f16 and zoom into the center, if you don't notice that this is definitely soft in the center, well, you need to get your eyes examined. However, when we look at the corners of the image at f16, they look very good and better than a number of lenses that I've examined over the past few years. So the number one thing you should know about this lens and this focal length is remember that if you put this thing in f2, you do not have a lot of depth of field. It's gonna be beautiful if you nail it right, but it can be problematic if you're not paying attention or if you're sticking the lens in f2 and relying only on autofocus all the time. You see what I mean? There's not much here. I ran into this issue right here with f2. I want to see Pippin's eyes and Pippin's nose. The problem was I had the lens in f2 and the camera correctly focused on the eyes, which it should have in autofocus face eye auto detect, which I had it on. Now keep in mind, I also shot this to test out higher ISOs, so it's at 6400. We'll get to ISO in a bit. The bottom line is be careful when you're shooting at f2 with this lens. It is easy to accidentally not quite get everything in focus, and that is not the fault of the lens. But talking about background, have a look at this right here. We're at f2, and I just love the subject isolation. And you can see as we stop down the lens, here we are at f4, f5.6, f8, and f16. It is so awesome to be able to go from this to this. Even just taking a quick shot of a handheld remote controller just like this, throwing it into f2, I love what it does to the bokeh in the back. Even going just from the middle range at f5.6 down to f2. Let's talk about ISO performance in low light. So taking a look at the raw files from the camera, there is a smidgen more noise, but I don't even know if you can see it on YouTube, but we jumped from 400 to 1000 and these look really similar. And zooming in to 100%, you can see 1600 ISO on the left, 2500 ISO on the right. And to be honest with you, I'm not seeing much difference between these two. Going into the top darker area of the image right here, there's a little bit more grain right here, but you got to really look for it. So now comparing 1600 to 4000 and jumping into 200%, yeah, definitely you can see the noise. Going to another area of the image toward the back, and it becomes more noticeable for sure at 4000 ISO. Let's compare it now to 6400 ISO. And yeah, there's definitely a little noise, but I would think there'd be a bit more. Looking up here, and the funny thing is, if I told you to pick between these two, which one has higher ISO, no doubt about it, you would say the one on the right. But would you say that it's as high as 6400? And I think that's what's important here. All right, so now we're jumping to ISO 8000, getting a little nuts here, but let's take a look. And areas around the shadows and where they meet the midtones, you can definitely see some of that noise. Now we're comparing it to 10,000 ISO. Jumping into 100%, and we're definitely looking at a much grainier image, but at 10,000 ISO. And now we're looking at it with the highest native ISO on the camera, 12,800. And yeah, when you get up this high, it really does affect the quality of the image. And you start to see that noise appear in color areas as well. Still though, pulling back a bit, it looks okay, halfway decent, at 12,800 ISO. We were just looking at the unedited raw files in Capture One. But if we take a look at the unedited, straight out of camera JPEGs, here we are at 1600 ISO compared to 6400. Now, clearly there's been a little bit of cleaning up that's been done, and I know that when I shot these, I did not have the camera set to any kind of value for noise reduction. I mean, look at this. Dropping the straight out of camera JPEGs right into Capture One, 1600 versus 6400 ISO. I mean, these are pretty much identical. Look at that. And if we compare it to 8000 ISO, I mean, seriously, these straight out of camera JPEGs are very similar. And if I jump all the way to 12,800 again, I finally see some noise difference between the two. But it's not a lot of noise. Again, these are straight out of camera JPEGs dropped into Capture One. I made no adjustments to them whatsoever. Now, I know that sometimes when you're importing JPEGs into Capture One will do a little trickery behind the scenes, but have a look at this. This is my noise reduction and sharpening panels, okay? And yeah, it looks like maybe there was some default settings going on. But you know what? Let's drop these down to 0. Everything down. It still looks good. So yes, I am impressed with the camera's handling of higher ISOs with low light, or ISO, or as Fujifilm calls it, sensitivity. If you go up to 12,800, yes, it's grainier, but it's not horrible grainier. Let's now look at the traditional mess and ugliness, otherwise known as extended ISO. So here we are with ISO 25,800 on the left and ISO 51,200 on the right. Forget the 51,001, that just looks horrible. I mean, I guess if you have no choice but to use it, nevertheless, with this camera, I'm noticing overall less color noise, less color shifting, and less overall muddiness when you crank it up to these ridiculous extended ISO values compared to, say, the X-T3 or the X-T4. For those of you that don't understand the difference between native ISO and extended ISO, please go watch my video on ISO. Just go to the search box, type in PAL Detect ISO, and you'll be on your way. Now there's another feature that's built into the camera that I wanted to also test out, and that is called the digital teleconverter. So right off the bat, if you are shooting with the digital teleconverter and you're shooting in both JPEG and RAW, your RAW files will not have the teleconversion applied to it. So for example, this is the RAW file right here, and here's the same JPEG for the same shot, but with the 70mm digital teleconverter applied to it. So how does the quality of using the digital teleconverter stack up against simply zooming in post-production? So here are the three images right here. This shot has no teleconverter applied whatsoever. This has the 50 and this has the 70. So let's zoom into 100%. So what I'll do is zoom in on the other two to match the 70 so we can take a look exactly at the performance. Now with the three of them locked into the same position, I'm going to zoom in even further. And I gotta tell you, I am not seeing much difference here. And that says a lot about the digital teleconverter feature on the camera. So I can tell you that this digital teleconverter shows really not much, if any, difference when a JPEG is dropped into a program like Capture One and you zoom into each one to roughly the same place. I mean, look at that. Moving on, let's talk about dynamic range. When it comes to dynamic range and then being able to take the RAW files, bring them into an editor like this, make some adjustments and see what you can recover from the shadows and pull back from the highlights. I was very impressed with the X100VI's performance. Let's take a look. Here's a RAW file shot at ISO 500. Look at our histogram, okay? When you see a histogram that's like flat and then on each side, you know you've got a high dynamic range image. Let's start with the highlights. Have a look at this area right here. Zooming in, it's pretty washed out. I'm now gonna grab my highlight slider and drag it all the way down. Look at that. If I zoom in, look at the difference between this and this. What I particularly like about it is how the background was brought back and still has that pleasing kind of bokeh ball look to it. Now we're going to adjust the opposite, the shadows, and bring those up. Here we go, shadow slider all the way up. Except you don't always want to go all the way up. I'm going to bring it down just a tad. And maybe I'll play around with the luma curve just like that. Here's before and after. Before, after. Zooming in and going to a darker area of the image, yeah, you can see some grain. So yes, some noise is being introduced when I brought back those shadows. And probably the worst of it may be right here, but I am zoomed in at 200%. If I go back and look at kind of the overall picture, to go from this to this is really nice. Let's see how the lowest native ISO handles this. Dropping down those highlights, bringing up the shadows. Here's before, here's after. Before, after. So if I now zoom into 400%, I am seeing some noise, but I'm not seeing a lot. Camera does a great job with this. Now, a feature that's on the camera that I don't think it does as good a job as you could is the HDR feature. This is an example of a scene that could use a little HDR tender love. So I put the camera in the HDR function and I took a shot, and this is what I got. And it is better, I guess. You can see that some of the sky has been brought back for sure. Look at that. And look at the ripples on the water. So the camera's processing of this did help. Looking at the trees though, it didn't really do a whole lot. So now we're gonna get rid of all this AI, this computer stuff, and we're gonna use something called our brains. So starting with that original RAW file, I'm gonna bring those highlights down, boom, all the way down. Maybe kick up the shadows just a little bit, drop down some of the brightness, play around with the luma curve. I love saying that, play around with the luma curve. It makes me sound really intelligent. And here we are with our version of HDR versus the camera's version. Our version is brighter right here. We did a better job with the sky. You see that? Our trees are better. Look, you can even see what's on the bark on our version. So don't worry about this whole AI computer stuff, okay? We're still doing a better job. Let's now talk about a major feature of the camera, and that is the in-body image stabilization, otherwise known as IBIS. IBIS is a 5-axis in-body stabilization system that claims to give you up to 6 stops of image stabilization. It controls camera shake. That's what IBIS does. But if you put it in 1/30th of a second because you think, oh, I've got IBIS, well, good for you, except when you're trying to photograph somebody running, it's gonna be blurry. And no, your IBIS is not broken. Remember, IBIS only helps out when it comes to camera shake. That's it. So for these next set of shots, I am going to be hand-holding the camera just like this. I didn't want to hold it really steady, just hold it like you would casually to see how IBIS would handle that. Here we are, handheld at 1/30th of a second. Zooming in to 100%, it looks good. Next, I'm going to drop my shutter speed down to 1/15th of a second. And I'm seeing almost no difference with this as well. Dropping down now to 1/8 of a second, still handheld. I'm seeing almost no difference with this as well. Now we're gonna try 1/4 of a second handheld. Okay, I'm starting to see a tad bit of motion blur when I'm zoomed into 100%. You can see it right here. Next, hand holding the camera again at 1/2 a second. And it looks like at 1/2 a second, we're starting to finally see that there's some camera shake blur. So I ran a lot more tests than this. And I have to tell you, I think that this camera, the X100VI, handles IBIS when it comes to still shooting and being able to, fix that camera shake. I think it handles it better than the X-T5. One of the areas where IBIS really shines and actually is the most useful for on the X100VI, and that is shooting video. Have a look at this right here. The footage on the left was shot with IBIS completely off. The footage on the right, I simply enabled IBIS and nothing else. In this next example, I've also enabled digital image stabilization, otherwise known as DIS, in the camera menu. You will get an additional crop factor. And basically the difference between regular IBIS and DIS is that regular old IBIS is from the sensor, the physical movement of the sensor, just like it is when you're taking still photos. But when you enable DIS, the camera is actually adding in the stabilization to the footage after you've shot it. It's acting like basically a video editor, okay? And it's not quite the same thing. I usually just enable IBIS, and in the case of my testing with the X100VI, that's exactly what I did and what I would recommend, especially if you're just starting out. There is also another stabilization feature with this camera that you need to know about, and that is called IS Mode Boost. It's located in the menu right below IBIS. So if you're just filming something and you're standing still, think of it as a tripod, that is when you want to enable IS Mode Boost. You do not want to enable boost mode if you're panning like this, okay? The way this is set up can be confusing for people because when you first look at it, right? When you jump into the menu just like that for the first time and you see it, it says suitable for shooting with panning, tilting, and tracking subjects. So that's what you think. Oh, great. Well, I'm going to be panning. I'm going to go ahead and enable IS Mode Boost. No, because watch this. If you go to on, look at how the menu changes. Suitable for static handheld shooting. Now, one thing that I wanted to tell you about the IBIS unit on this camera is that yes, you get up to 6 stops of IBIS, but that applies only if you're using either the LCD screen or the electronic viewfinder. If you're using the optical viewfinder, you will only get 5.5 stops. And the reason for this is that when you are using the optical viewfinder, the readout speed on the camera's sensor will slow down just slightly to help the camera conserve power. Now, the X100VI has a number of continuous shooting options. On the front of the camera, you can access all of the burst modes and a number of other features by using the drive button. You can shoot up to 11 frames per second if you're using the mechanical shutter. If you switch it over to electronic shutter, you can shoot up to 20 frames per second, but that does come with a crop factor. As far as high-speed shooting and filling the buffer is concerned, if you're coming from a Fujifilm camera like the X-T5, which supports the UHS-2 SD card speeds, you will definitely notice that the X100VI's camera buffer will fill up a lot faster. So here I set the camera to shoot in both JPEG and RAW, and I set the RAW format to uncompressed. I set the burst mode to 11 frames, and here we go. Now let's try it where we set the camera to only shoot JPEGs at the highest JPEG quality. You are not going to get the kind of burst shooting that you would get on a camera like the X-T5. And now we come to the part of the video where we're going to talk about autofocus. Just like the X-T5, the X100VI has the same completely revised autofocus system that incorporates both the more powerful 5th generation X-Trans processor as well as an autofocus prediction algorithm. And I'm hesitant to say this because I did only have the camera for a week, but I think Face Eye Auto Detect on the X100VI is better than on the X-T5. But please keep something in mind. Whenever you're dealing with autofocus, it's not just about the camera and the processor. The type of lens that you're using, right? That has a huge impact on autofocus for the camera. The only lens that I was able to test out was the 23mm that came with the camera. I'm just saying that with the 23mm lens on the X100VI, I found that autofocus, particularly Face Eye Auto Detect, to be wonderful. So I ran it through a number of tests, starting with both single point and zone continuous autofocus. And have a look right here. It nailed almost every single shot. If we switch over to a low light situation, notice how the camera struggles a little bit in trying to acquire focus. And I noticed that when I combined subject detection with wide tracking, it handled a subject moving very quickly and almost directly toward the camera. Now, autofocus for video has a number of new features for this camera. First of all, you have much better subject tracking, Face Eye Auto Detect, and that sort of thing. And you also have touch tracking autofocus, where you're using the LCD screen to tap and tell your camera exactly which subject you want it to track. When you're shooting people, putting the camera into Face Eye Auto Detect autofocus is absolutely outstanding. This was the first time when I was running right toward the camera that literally in almost every single shot, the camera nailed the focus. I also tested this camera with fast-moving subjects with its AI algorithm. It kept up with the cars. It got the shots in focus. I've taken this exact same test standing in the exact same spot with the X-T4 and the X-T5, and this camera did it better. What I did test pretty much put it on par with the X-T5. Let's talk about video now, which continues to become more popular for photographers and creators. Now, I'm not going to go through every single video combination and spec and codec, and I'm just not. In fact, there needs to be a warning message that says, do not read this while operating heavy machinery. What I will do, though, is I will cover the most significant, important features that you need to know. At the very top of the list, the X100VI can now shoot 6.2K 30p 10-bit video at 200 megabits per second. Be aware, however, that this is not open gate. There is a crop factor if you shoot at that resolution. And that 6K 10-bit 422 format can be recorded internally on the SD card. And like the X-T5, it also shoots in 4K up to 60p and 1080 up to 240p. Among the video options and combinations, you can shoot in 422 10-bit as well as in both F-Log and F-Log2. And there's also a special version of 4K called 4K HQ high quality. And unlike regular 4K, 4K HQ does have crop factor just like the 6.2K. And there's a very good reason for that. All 4K HQ really is the camera shooting in 6.2K and then downsampling that video into 4K for you with the idea that it's going to be better quality. So right here on the left side, I've got 6.2K, and on the right side, I've got regular 4K. And as you can see, the 6.2K resolution does bring out more detail. Now check out 4K HQ compared to 6.2K. I'm not seeing a huge amount of difference, but of course you are giving up something with 4K HQ, namely the crop factor of 1.3, and also the fact that you cannot shoot at up to 60 frames per second. You got to stay at 30 or below. Let's now check what higher ISO values does to video. Here's what 2000 ISO looks like. And here is 6400 ISO. And here it is at 10,000 ISO. Another great tool that the camera has that you can use with video is the built-in ND filter. This ND filter is not a digitally or artificially created ND filter. Rather, this is the real thing. It is an actual filter that when you enable it, pops out in front of the path where the light comes through the lens and before it hits the camera's sensor. It's a real ND filter, and it's a 4-stop filter. So you can't change the number of stops. It's not a variable filter. And the reason why, obviously, is because it is a real piece of hardware built into the lens. You can also shoot in slower slow motion, up to 1080 HD at 240p. And this is what it looks like right here with those exact settings. There is something else that I have not seen before on a Fujifilm camera. When you shoot in regular 24, 30, or 60 frames per second, normal video, you've got this red record frame that lights up. However, if you set the camera to record in this special slow motion mode that I just discussed, the screen now switches to a turquoise border so that you immediately know what video mode that you're using. That is a very nice touch. This camera also introduces a brand new manual focus assist feature called Focus Map, and this is for video. You can choose either color or monochrome. When you enable this, it runs in real time while you're shooting. Any areas that are out of focus behind the focal plane are represented by these blue squares. If you see orange squares, well, then that's the area that is in front of the frame. And the parts of the scene that are green squares are all within the same field of focus. This is another feature I wish I had had more time to play with, but at least you know it's there. There is one video use that I don't think this camera would be very good at, and that is vlogging. Let me show you exactly what that looks and sounds like. So here I am testing out the vlogging capability of the camera. I am using the onboard microphone. This is what it sounds like. This is what it looks like. I have digital image stabilization turned on. I'm at f2, 1/48 of a second. I'm shooting in 4K at 24 frames per second, and I have auto ISO. And because there is no flip around screen, which is absolutely critical for vlogging, I cannot recommend the X100VI as a vlogging camera. Now, as far as using it as a webcam, yeah, it works pretty well for that, and I did test that out as well. You go into the connection settings of the camera and make sure that you choose USB webcam. And that's it. You don't need any special Fuji software or some yet another app to install to make this work. Just plug your camera into your computer using the included USB-C to A cable. And as soon as you open a program like Zoom, you can choose your Fuji webcam as the source. And you can also use the camera's microphone or built-in external microphone as the audio choice. Here's the difference between a common 1080p Logitech webcam and the X100VI camera. And you can also change some settings on the camera, and they will be reflected in the webcam program like Zoom. Here I've changed my film simulation to Acros, because you really do need that awesome Acros black and white look for Zoom. We are now at the portion of the video that I worry about the most when I make these videos, and that is to share with you my final thoughts and recommendations on this camera. This is a very powerful and capable camera for both stills and video, but as I was testing the camera, I definitely noticed that I needed to replace the battery twice as often as I did with my X-T5. This is a smaller battery, and it has less power, and it does need to charge more, so keep that in mind. With regard to video, Fuji does indicate that you can shoot 4K 60 frames per second video up to about 45 minutes using this battery. And for 6K video, which is limited at 30 frames per second, it's the same amount of time, 45 minutes. So, should you get one of these cameras? Well, that all depends on where you're coming from. If you already own an X-T5, that's a hard decision, and I would say, think about it carefully, because basically the X100VI is pretty much an X-T5 in terms of what it can do, but with a very different form factor. What if you already own the original X100V predecessor? That's a tough one for me to answer, because I never owned one, and to be honest with you, I never used the X100V. You could make a very good argument in getting one because of the fact that the autofocus is greatly improved and it has an IBIS unit, which if you're shooting video is a big benefit for the camera. And of course, you need to ask yourself if you need that extra 40 megapixel sensor size or not. Those are ultimately decisions that only you can make. So what about people who are brand new to Fujifilm and are coming from other camera brands? Well, it comes down to the lens, to be honest with you, because if you're used to interchangeable lenses and now you're going to a fixed lens camera, you better know what you're doing with that. So it could be a huge benefit, and there's a lot of reasons to limit and restrict yourself to only one lens, for sure. But there's also an equal number of valid reasons why you would need to be able to have an interchangeable lens system. If you are brand new to photography in general, and I mean brand new, should you get the X100VI camera? I don't think so. I have two reasons why. There is no better way for someone beginning photography and wanting to learn all about the exposure triangle than having a camera where you have a dedicated dial for each one of those settings. And because the X-T5 and the X100VI are so similar, I would say go with the X-T5. And the second reason is very simple. Taking a lens off, right? And changing it out for a different focal length or a zoom or a wide angle. Even if you can't afford these lenses, you could certainly rent some of them and practice with them. So having those two options, I think, is very important. That being said, with a camera like the X100VI, you can certainly fall in love with the feel and the look of it. And if you already have, then just get it. So I want to end this video by telling you that when Fujifilm contacted me and asked if I wanted to take a look at the X100VI, I almost said no. I prefer being able to swap out the lenses anytime I want. I like larger cameras like the GFX much more than I like these little small compact cameras. But I said okay, and I spent the last week using and testing every part of that camera. I love everything about it. And yeah, although the camera is smaller than what I'm used to, it felt great in my hands. And the camera ended up doing something that I didn't expect. It made me want to take more photos. That 23mm lens focal length that was combined with the REALA Ace film sim and that 40 megapixel sensor, that entire combination right there, it just felt like the perfect package for me. It was tough returning it back to Fuji when I was done testing, but it was a really enjoyable experience. And it actually reminded me of just how special and how unique it can be to have a personal connection with the camera that you entrust to record your work, your creative vision, and most importantly, your life. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you found the video helpful or at least entertaining. And if you did, be sure to give it the like and subscribe. I will see you again in a new video very soon. Take care.
Like a fool I am and I'll always be. I've got a dream. I've got a dream. They can change their minds, but they can't change me. I've